What was going on in poetry and theater after the avant-garde decline? Well, we see here Thomas Esther Eliot, T.S. Eliot, a North American poet who lived most of his life in England and received the Nobel Prize. He started to publish in the 19-teens. A disciple of Ezra Pound, his first successful poem, the Love Song of Alfred Prufrock, already showed the features of much of his poetry in later years. The reflection on the absurdity of life, on the uselessness of some efforts of modern life, something that becomes more apparent in The Wasteland, his book from 1922, where he portraits the desolation, the disenchantment of the world after the First World War, where millions of people were killed for absurd reasons. 4 quartets and many other wonderful books that put Eliot, because of his musicality and the depth of his thought, in the first line of poets of the post-avant-garde. Similarly, Robert Frost, American poet, and his direct style towards nature. He's not precisely an avant-garde poet, but he's a poet that precisely responds to the claim of being understood, of writing not with changing, transforming the words, the structures, but more with the sense that we have to interpret using language our role in this world. In the 1950s, Allen Ginsberg, one of the most important members of the so-called beatnik movement, poets that were very committed to liberal ideas, free sex, use of drugs, gender equality. His poem, Howl, talks about his generation. I have seen the best minds of generation and so on. Why? Because this is the generation that will have to face the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and they just didn't agree that people in general should go to a very distant land to invade a country and die uselessly. The movement in many ways was centralized in the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco that still exists if you go and visit that beautiful city. Elizabeth Bishop, American poet of the 1950s and 60s, who traveled to Brazil, lived there for a while, returned, taught at Harvard, and received the Pulitzer Prize, is also a very good representative of post-avant-garde poetry in the United States. Cesar Vallejo from Peru, he actually covers several periods of literature, from the pre-avant-garde in the 19-teens to the full avant-garde in 1922 with his book Trilce, a word that doesn't exist in Spanish, it was just made up by him. And then in the 1930s, when he was living in exile in France, he published very few poems, but he wrote one of the most potent, one of the most impressive books of poetry in Spanish or in any language, Human Poems. Also in a style that is more concerned not so much with experimenting with language, but with the message, the possibility that poetry could help to the liberation of human beings and the construction of more just society. Just as his contemporary Pablo Neruda, who had a much longer life, born in 1904, he died right after the military coup in Chile in 1973. He received the Nobel Prize in 1971 and covers a very broad spectrum of styles. He was also an avant-garde poet in the 1920s and 30s, and a post-avant-garde poet in the 1940s, committed to political causes, and then at the end of his life, he was more concerned about natural phenomena, the landscape, the land of his native Chile. In theater, Eugene Ionesco is one of the primary producers of modern contemporary plays. The Rhinoceros, in which he talks about the absurdity of life. Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, again, theater that talks about irrational situations. Arthur Miller, the United States. Bertolt Brecht from Germany, who basically is the representative of the modern form of realism.